Hello, I'm Lindley Gooden. Welcome to Market Forces Transforming the Customer Experience in Banking webinar, hosted in association with Lexmark. Now, the retail banking sector in the UK, as you know, is at a crossroads. The number of customers visiting their branch has fallen by 30%, while the number banking on their mobile has risen by over 200% in the last 4 years. So it's obvious that advances in technology and changing expectations are putting pressure on every bank to respond, as you'll know. Banks now, more than ever, need to embrace new technologies and transform their customer experiences to stay competitive. The challenges then are clear, but so are the opportunities. Digital advances mean that banks can create a more personalized customer experience across channels and provide customers with what they want, whenever they want, and wherever they want it to. Over the next hour, we'll be investigating strategies to attract and to keep customers while working efficiently across the business. Before we do that, let's meet the fantastic panel that we have here today. First of all, Jo Brown. Hello, Jo.
Hi there.
Jo is Customer Experience Director at Lloyds Bank. Jo has 18 years of experience in delivering digital propositions for large organisations, and before joining Lloyds, Jo held senior digital positions at Barclays, Metro International and BSkyB. Good to see you, Jo. Next is Jason Bates. Hello, Jason.
Hey there.
Jason is the co-founder, Chief Customer Officer and Head of Product at Mondo Bank, a digital challenger aiming to provide customer-centric banking on mobile platforms. Jason's already founded a challenger bank and a digital transformation company. Good to see you too, Jason. Thanks. Next is Chris Jolly. Hello, Chris.
Afternoon.
Chris is Chairman of Civilized Investments, currently applying for authorisation from the PRA as Civilized Bank, the first UK bank to sign the banker's oath. Civilized is focused on building customer trust and loyalty, particularly with SMEs. In previous roles, Chris ran Societe Generale and Commerzbank's London offices and served as a managing director at Merrill Lynch. Great to see you too.
Good to be here.
Last but certainly not least, we have Darren Collins. Hello, Darren.
Hi, Lindley.
Darren is Financial Services and Insurance Director at Lexmark. He leads the team responsible for strategy and providing thought leadership to global organizations in financial services. He helps organizations by mapping technical solutions to key business problems, and he has over 15 years of experience in financial services, enabling organizations to increase their responsiveness to customers, provide better customer service, and gain that all-important competitive edge. Thanks for joining us again, Darren, and thanks to Lexmark for supporting our webinar.
Great to be here.
Couldn't do it without you. So we have lots to cover, don't we, over the next hour, and you're bound to have your own questions and comments too, so we want to give you every opportunity to put them to our panelists if you're watching us live today. You can do that throughout the webinar, either using the Twitter hashtag, which is Customer15, that's Customer15, the numbers, or via the question section here on our webpage. We'll try to get to as many as we can towards the end of the discussion, but for now, let's get it started with how to understand and meet customer expectations. Well, that starts, doesn't it, by painting a clear picture of what customers will want from banks in the coming years. That's the starting point. So, what do you think, Jason? How will customer expectations change by, let's say, 2020?
That's a long way out,
isn't it?
I think we should start with. Customers are obviously, as you've said, having an increasingly digital life. They're used to that first page of apps on their phone, providing simple, if not magical experiences, being contextual, being real-time, being aware. And banking is just a very long way away from that. You know, currently, especially for a current account, you know, you'll get a balance that's potentially a few days out of date. You'll get a chronological list of transactions. And it's that gap between customers managing their day-to-day life, the kind of what we're doing to help them, and what they're getting currently, that's the big problem.
It's a delivery mechanism, isn't it, really, at the moment, in some ways?
I'd say no. So, you know, digital isn't just another channel. It provides so much more, especially when you combine it with connectivity to other services, with machine learning. It will seem like magical banking in a few years.
Yes. Darren, what do you think about that? Yeah, I mean, the really big things that are changing.
Yeah, I heard an expression last week that really stuck in my mind, and it was 1 second is the new minute. And I think, you know, if you look outside of the banking sector, if you look at other industries, if you look at the services we now consume by Amazon One Click or Uber, you know, it's that kind of instant level of service. I think, you know, as a result of that, we're going to start to expect that cross-industry. So it's fair to predict that that level of service will be required in the banking sector as well. Honestly, I don't think we've seen that yet. If you look at account switching rates, they're still very low. They're around about 2% annually. I think looking forward, though, it's fair to predict that that's going to rise sharply. Again, increasing expectations. As a customer, I want fast, easy service. Whether I'm opening an account, applying for a mortgage, I'd like personalised communication. Treat me as a customer, not as a transaction. Connected services and trust, reliable service. So I think, as you look across the markets, regardless of whether you're a challenger bank or whether you're, an established bank, that's the level of increasing customer expectation, what one has to service.
Let's face it, we customers, we're not necessarily driving hard the next product. We want our lifestyle to be delivered. We want our way of banking, the bedrock of our lives to be right. But we're not thinking about what's on page 5 of the next big project that you've got in the back office, really working hard on. We don't know that stuff yet, and actually maybe we don't necessarily, until we know it's really good, don't need it. But it's up to the banking industry to come up with these products. Chris, are there gaps? Do banks have it all sewn up in terms of what people are being offered at the moment, or are there big areas, big gulfs that customers might expect?
I think the banks are a long way from it at the moment. What is interesting to me is how generational change will drive this as well, not only in the retail space, but in where we focus, which is more on the SME side, because increasingly the millennium generation is now becoming business managers, business owners, business drivers, and they will bring their normal retail approach, as it were, to banking to their corporate lives as well. And so focusing in the space we're focusing in on, we have to be able to do that, and that is absolutely not the case at the moment.
Evolving fast, but Joe, sorry, it feels like you're under pressure now already, is the first thing you said to us, but actually, there is so much work going on in the background to provide better customer experience throughout banking, throughout financial services. How positive, how hopeful, realistically, is it to provide really quickly, say in the next 5 years? That's a long time, as Jason said, but how do you think this will evolve? And do you think banks will drive it? Do you think we'll drive it? What do you think in terms of the development?
Well, I think it's driven by customer behaviour. And the interesting thing about 5 years out, I think, is that it's both a really long time in terms of digital progression, but actually not a very long time when you look at our population. So our population is ageing, and there will be more people in the ageing sector of our population than in the young demographic. So we have to be really careful not to make assumptions about the people that we're delivering for, particularly when you've got a large audience and large customer base. So I think the difficulty for banks is how to get it right for everybody. Without leaving anybody kind of out of their thinking.
It's a really good point, isn't it? The differentiator, though, customer experience is where we're all going. It's so important to have a relationship. Chris, how important a differentiator do you think customer experience will be in banking?
I think the relationship side of it is the key to this, and that is the big differentiator. But the relationships are different things. If it's a corporate relationship, obviously you want to ideally have a relationship manager you can talk to, maybe face to face. But you can equally well have a very good relationship through an app with Amazon. Everything. You have a good relationship with Amazon, but it's all done through an app. But it's still a good relationship because it works. Yeah. And so the nature, it's all about getting that relationship right, and that is, to me, the key differentiator.
And obviously the industry is going to be worried at all times, and everybody is worried at all times about how do we really improve that relationship. How is it up to us to improve that relationship? But actually, when I'm selecting my app and I'm interacting with my app, and whichever my favorite is today, it's my choice. I want that. I like that today, or I like it every day of the week if I'm on the train. And so, does that take the pressure off a bit, Jason? What do you think?
Well, I think Joe makes a really good point about digital sort of transformation is going faster than transformation of society. You just look at what kids are learning at school, or what apps my nieces are using, combined with Edith, who's 70, who has her checkbook and the branch that she wants to go to. I think part of the problem is we're getting this smear, a homogeneous or a semi-homogeneous kind of market is changing into very different groups.
Isn't it because we have the power? We have the power now to choose. We have the power now to talk about our bank This is not new, but it's powerful. It really, that engagement is so important, because otherwise, not only my customer will vote with their feet, but they'll tell everybody else about it. Isn't that the fundamental fear?
Well, personally, I think that it's technology transformation. It's the fact that a vast proportion of the population now experiences the magic of a smartphone and what that can do for you. But equally, there are large percentages of the population that don't and haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
And that creates some very different markets.
Yeah.
So I think big banks have a difficulty in having a very large and dispersed customer base that's actually changing. Changing beneath the feet, changing as month on month.
Joe, how are you seeing the interactions changing?
I think, so my point of view on this is that a lot of it's led by retail. So if I think about the difference between my 15-year-old daughter and my mother, they're both iPad users, smartphone users, but my mum doesn't do any of her banking online, but my daughter will inevitably do all of hers online, and kind of goes back to my previous point, it's what leads customer behaviour to change. I don't think the way that people bank necessarily does, but if you see the migration out of town centres to online shopping in all of its guises, I suppose, means less footfall, obviously, in town centres, which means that the branch isn't necessarily entirely a thing of the past, but the footfall will go down because there aren't people in town centres because they're doing things online, so that's a fundamental shift in customer behaviour generally, and then they need their banking and their methods of payment to keep up with other things that they're doing. So in a way, we'll always be fast followers, or we should be. It's how fast we follow that's going to be really important.
Yeah, and we are innovators. The customers are innovators, but only to a certain degree. It's only a few years ago that we wouldn't have thought, maybe security was an issue online and shopping online and so on. But actually, familiarity. Customer behaviour is guided, certainly in older age groups, by familiarity, by trust. And so is there now an assumption, and also, Darren, I'll come to you in a second, is there now an assumption that it'll work? It'll work, so security isn't perhaps as important as it was 5 years ago. I don't bank on my mobile all that often, but I do check my details, I do check this and I do check that, but I'm in my 40s. So but familiarity breeds love, actually. Yeah. And I would say is that not the driver? So don't worry about responding too quickly, get it right and follow the crowd. Yeah, we should, and back to the switching point, switching figures are really low, so I think actually you need, in a way, to be delivering terrible customer experience to drive change. It's not that people are looking for better, because actually it's quite a big deal to try something new, and you've got to leave all that behind, particularly in banking terms. Yeah. But it is important that we follow faster than we are now, because actually it's the proliferation of banking services through new entrants into the industry that are kind of picking off different areas like payments, for example, and taking them for that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Joe's point there. I think, even in the instances where you might have a bad customer experience, often customers still don't move. Yeah. Why? Because really there isn't a differentiator or a compelling event to do so. Nothing better. Exactly. Again, I think we're going to see that shift pretty soon. If I look at customers that we work with, I see two investment areas right now. I see the first investment area is around streamlining the process. And that doesn't mean just digital. That means the process in the bank, in the branch. It may mean on the website. It may mean via an app. But I tend to use this term, brilliant basics. Get the basics right. Get them really good, regardless of the channel and the demographic you're dealing with. The second area of investment I see is more around the value-add services. So what services does my bank provide me to make my life a little easier? So that may mean snapping a photo of a cheque rather than having to visit a branch. That may mean taking a picture of a bill to automatically pay it. I think as we see the emergence and the results of those two investment areas, then there's more of a compelling event to switch providers. Jason, what are the key breakpoints, if there are key breakpoints that you identify in retail banking at the moment?
Well, from a customer's perspective, and I should say, I totally agree with Darren that the next wave of banking is really about building banking around how customers think and how customers behave.
Flipping it around.
It is. Because traditionally it's been built around, product names and artifacts that banks put out. Yeah. The current account we don't learn about until we're a certain age, and then we learn all the intricacies of what that means and how that works. Yeah. But we do know about our own lives and how that works. Yeah. So from a customer's perspective, there are a variety of channels with which I would communicate with you, and each of those channels has has strengths and weaknesses. A letter is great for certain things. A phone call is great for other things. Web chat, digital is great for real-time contextual interactivity. So we see a big move towards obviously digital banking. Yeah. Banking is the perfect digital product. It's actually a number in a ledger somewhere. And while we might pay for things and it impacts us every day throughout our everyday lives, there's obviously a great move towards digital.
But briefly, Chris, in terms of SMEs and so on, in terms of the challenges from smaller companies, what do you think things are changing, and what do you think are the important next developments there?
What's interesting, I think, is in a way it's a bit back to the future. I think in some ways for the SMEs, because all the work we've done in talking to them and talking to potential customers is that what they really want is to go back to having a proper relationship manager who's local to them, who is empowered to work with them. And that's where the technology comes in for us, because nowadays with the technology that our local bankers, local relationship managers can have, and a branchless structure, they can go to their customers. They have to go to their customer and do everything with them online, effectively, and real time. And that's the point about the speed and ease of processes. It's all online, real time in terms of decision making. That, to me, is the big change.
And the agility that's
exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right.
Well, however customers' expectations of their banks evolve over the coming years, it's clear that providing a great consistent experience across channels is really important to give customers what they really want to use and how and when they want to use it. Joe, how will the channel preferences or channel love affairs, the love of your app, how do you think that's going to evolve? Do you really think that we're all customers, will use our banks to get value-added services to do all that stuff, or is it still going to be just the bedrock of our financial lives?
I think so. It's difficult to predict with any accuracy what's going to happen, because things have moved along so quickly. I mean, I've been involved in transformation programs where you think you get it right, and then Apple launch an iPad, and then nothing works, and all of those things happen in a really kind of short space of time. But I think the best thing we can do is constantly take counsel from our customers and ask them what they're doing, keep up to date with the data and the statistics of how they're using our products and services, and never make any assumptions about which channel they want to use for what, but kind of break down the analysis to point of need, and then understand what the best medium is for them to interact with us to get the right result.
Whereas omnichannel it still is used a lot, but it was the buzzword actually. It's that consistency across, isn't it? It's getting the channels right, the customer interaction right, but having that consistency. Darren, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think Joe makes a really interesting point there, and it's you look at the industry as a whole, and there's been a real shift in that regard. So, if you wind the clock back, I would say the banking sector took very much an inside-out view. So they would think about the systems and reliability and strength and operation. That's very, very key. That still remains. But I think now we shift far more to an outside-in view. We go to the customer and try to better understand, what products and services do they require, and how would they like to consume them. And then we go back inside the bank to try and design and architect to it. And that's quite a tough balancing act, because the bank has to still ensure reliability and compliance. Let's use that dirty word. But the regulators are obviously increasing that level of overhead. Yet customers are saying, well, make it simpler. make it easy.
And
It's a
joining
tough
up
challenge.
across that whole landscape internally and externally, Chris.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, I think, is that as always in every business, the banking world is in a cycle. The last cycle was about broadening the range of products that you put to your customers, designing products to go to them into financial services, into insurance, all these things. That patently didn't work. And now I think it's about going back to the basics, doing the basics right in terms of current accounts, the apps, just the movement of money. And then from a customer-centric point of view, doing all the things that Joe's talking about in terms of understanding what people want to do, then you can start building, again, the range of products you provide. But do it that way round, rather than the way that it was tried in the last cycle and failed.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really interesting on the kind of Back to the Future theme, kind of riffing on that. Go back 30 or 40 years, find the best village bank manager in the UK, who intimately knew his customers and could provide just an obscene level of service in terms of, little Sally's going to school, let's set up a savings account for her, or I've looked at your pension, or I've spoken to the factory where you work and there's some issues with payments. We went through a sort of mass market factory printout banking revolution, which was great in some respects in terms of cost and scale and everything else. But it stripped out a lot of those services. And I think whether it's Chris and the bank manager who comes to visit you and gives you back that boutique level of service, or whether it's advanced technology that can actually understand your context, understand what the problems are you're facing, that you have, you're 3 weeks into your payday, you've got £422 in your account. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know.
That is the holy grail, isn't it? Because a bank manager in your village would have known you, yes, very well, but it was that not discerning, it was that discretion. It was that context that was so important. Understanding that character, that person, did have the ability to deliver what they promised, or take that loan because it was going to be paid back eventually with interest. It's that area. So in terms of systems, where do you focus? Where do you focus that? Do you focus on the context? Do you focus on the black and white, what I want right now? Look, you need to do everything. Let's face it. Everything. That could be the answer, Joe. Everything.
Yeah, I mean, the landscape has changed enormously since those times. So, I mean, I'd argue that some of the products that we provide in banking haven't changed. I mean, people still need access to their money. They still need to be able to pay people. They still need to borrow money to buy a house.
Yeah.
We've overcomplicated and proliferated that product set, but fundamentally it's back to the same thing. It's the service offering that's changed, and no longer is it just the kind of typically the head male of the house that interacts with their bank that needs that kind of personal service, or the small business in that community that you know really well, because the world has changed and everybody has access to banking from this age to this age now. So, we've had to necessarily change that and automate some of it.
Let's go to a classic, a chestnut, a good old chestnut, which is face-to-face banking. Chris, practically, is it realistic that face-to-face banking can ever compete with digital?
It's interesting. No is the answer. It can't. Just in terms of sheer volume, it can't. And I think the interesting thing is that, going back to my Amazon comment, you can develop a very good relationship just through the analytics and understanding, because you can take to your point, there can be a trigger when it comes to the fact that you've got 400 quid in your bank account and the standing orders are 500 for the balance of the month. You can get a flag comes up. All that stuff is about developing the relationship and knowledge of your customer. I think the advantage and it is an advantage which the challenger banks have relative to the larger banks, because our cost base is so low and our cost income ratios are so low, we can afford to have the face-to-face arrangements, which maybe the other people can't afford to do anymore.
And it actually helps you to keep hold of your customers because it's a unique thing that it's face-to-face. But can you, Jason, something like Mondo, can you actually offer the full spectrum? I mean, is it possible? Because there must be a limit to how much you can do. I run an SME, quite honestly.
Sure.
Only so many hours in a day.
So, I see the future of financial services, retail financial services, being disaggregated. People are picking things off and finding the right provider, for a particular service, whether that's insurance, peer-to-peer lending, pensions. I think the average customer has 1.4 products with their bank. So this kind of view of, a mega bank being able to offer everything to everyone, well, they don't. So in the end, it's a case of how do we make customers' lives better? You know, what are the problems that they have day to day? So, an interesting example. If you go and talk to someone about their day-to-day money, their day-to-day finances, not banking specifically, but tell me about your month. How does it kind of work? Everyone starts on a payday. It's like, well, I get paid. Yet banking traditionally always starts on the first of the month, or there's your monthly statement. So it's just little things like that where actually banking, you know, customers have had to traditionally fit in with, rather than, you know, Linley, let's talk about your financial life and how we can make it better. Yeah. There's that weird direct debit that comes at the end of the month for the gym. Right. Well, let's take care of that. Yeah. And you've got to send money to friends. Okay, well, how do you do that? Yeah. Yeah. You know, and being able to pick off all of those journeys to deliver something that's great, for me, is key. I think there's a great quote from William Gibson on the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. Mm-hmm. And I think if you go to, you know, to the super rich and the super wealthy, you have someone who just looks after them constantly. You know, you can get there with the right systems.
So what's Darren? I think you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, I just so I absolutely echo Jason's point there. I think that there is an opportunity, though, certainly in the digital channel. I was reading some research. I think it was from PwC, and they quantified that a digital enabled customer is far more likely to take a set of additional products from that bank. So that 1.4, you know, whatever the number is, starts to rise and increase. And to your point, Lynn, you know, we all lead busy lives. If I have a bank that is proactively advising me in terms of products and services that may benefit me, that has great value for me as an individual. Yeah. Easy to say, tough to do. Tough to do because you have to understand me as a person, and I don't walk into that branch anymore, so we're missing that personal.
And you have to get that communication right, don't you? The level of communication, the speed, the timing.
Has to be appropriate, and it has to be timely. Yeah. You know, don't position products to me that I don't need at this stage of my life. So, you know, in a digital channel, I think there's a great opportunity to learn even more about our customers and then really leverage that in terms of, let's be honest, you know, driving the profitability of the bank, because, you know, we are all in business. We're here to make money.
Can I just ask, Joe, in terms of the strategy, let's call it omnichannel still, we still are, what are the key things that maybe the key thing that you focus on? And actually, I would wonder whether that joining up from the customer point of view all the way through the organisation, is that now an omni-channel focus?
Yeah, I mean, the point you made earlier about omni-channel was a real buzzword, multi-channel, lots of words to that effect were fairly interchangeably.
I don't use the internet, I don't call the internet a channel, I'm a customer, but still, yeah.
And I think that's the difference for me, is about leveraging digital as a platform at least as much as we think about it as a channel, and how as a distributed platform you can reach customers at their point of need through whichever channel they choose to interact. That's not the same as offering the exact same service in every channel, which I think everybody went down for a minute and then understood that is wasteful.
Last time I mentioned seamless, I think people spat at me from the panel, but consistent seems to be right.
Yeah, it's just picking off, you know, what is the customer need, and then and by and large, how do they need to interact with us at that point of need? And, you know, quite often that's over the telephone, or might be click to call or something like that. If you've lost your credit card, there's one way you're going to want to deal with that, and that is not going into a branch, and it's not necessarily doing something digitally. So it's just, again, it's going back to the point of need.
I have a burning question about personalisation. I'll come to that in a second, Jason, if that's all right. But first of all, we're going to move on to the next section. Please do keep getting in touch. You can use the webpage here, the question section, or you can get in touch on Twitter with Customer15. That's the hashtag. Do it. You won't regret it. You'll get a plug. You'll get a mention. Let's hear from you. We just really want to hear from you and your experiences and some questions for us. Okay. But for now, let's look at the obstacles facing banks and how they can be overcome. What do you think the biggest obstacles are in terms of improving customer experience? Who would say that they've identified just one recently, apart from the number of hours in the day, Jason? let's go to personalisation first of all. In terms of that, personalisation is the holy grail. It is one of the biggest obstacles, but how achievable is it?
Well, with modern technology, it is achievable. I think if you'd have asked the question 10, 15, 20 years ago, it would have been a different answer. But the fact that you can you can do such large volumes of computing, of processing, and that you can get so much data to help make decisions, in semi-real time, means that actually understanding that a customer hasn't tapped out of TfL, the tube, with their contactless card and has therefore got a £15 charge, means the bank, or a small app, a small microservice within that bank can see that, can do something about that. Yeah. So, I don't envy large banks with legacy systems and, mainframes reaching back, in some cases 30 or 40 years, but being able to write thousands of services that are looking for particular contexts, for particular situations in which we can help. Not sell products, not try and get more money, but actually deliver magical service. I think that for Mondo is kind of our aim.
We had somebody on a panel recently from TfL, and they said that the reception to emails, we all get those emails if you're living in London, right? And I live in London. The response is fantastic to these emails. It's just an email because it's relevant, timely, and appropriate. Yep, sure. It was a really interesting example. So it can be done. But in terms of robotic process automation, what role does that play? Jason, first of all, briefly, what do the back office work on that is really important.
Sure. I think there was a McKinsey report not so long ago that said actually for big banks, one of the biggest opportunities for digital was in the back office. Because while it's been very much a sort of outside in on the shiny veneer on the customer facing piece, there are offices probably not too far away with thousands of people working in more traditional ways, in maker, checker, roles and a variety of things. So go and talk to a Google or Facebook and talk to them about straight through processing, and they'll look at you like you're insane because it's all straight through processing. So there's obviously a big challenge there that hopefully we're taking advantage of in terms of entering this market because there are a lot of legacy banks that are going to struggle with that.
Chris, briefly,
Yeah, I think the robotic point is an interesting one, but and banking, certainly the core retail banking is ideal for that because of course it's all about repeatable actions, and that's just what
because there is a system, there is a process, and that can be followed.
I think there's a huge difference here then between the older banks which have are providing that type of service much more than we would intend to do, and this I think is the fundamental point. It is that the challenger banks and people in fintech can really focus in on these specific small areas where they can see an opportunity. It is a real challenge. I don't envy the Lloyds of this world because they do have to look at the much bigger picture.
So we've heard from Jason, we've heard from you, Chris. Darren, give us the overview. What is it that this can really do and is doing?
Yeah, so it's interesting to hear the feedback from the panel there because to me, so first off, RPA is quite a buzzword, I think, in the industry right now. And I think it has a place in both camps, so in the established players and in the emerging, let's say, challenger banks. I say that because I go back to the earlier point of kind of opposing forces here. So the first force is the customer saying, make it simple, reduce the number of steps, give me what I need wherever, whenever I am. Then on the other side, you've got the other force, which may be legacy systems and the complexity that provides, but it may also be the increasing overhead from the regulators and the level of checks and data they're forcing you to acquire when it comes to onboarding a customer or providing them with a product. So for me, I think RPA has an appropriate place in both camps to help streamline that and ultimately provide a great customer experience. I was reading a report, maybe it was the McKinsey report, and they were saying, something like RPA, productivity gains, typically 35 to 50%. The other side was around error rates. Now an error, if you take a human being, typically they make between 2 and 5 errors every 100 steps. Now if I'm automating that with a robot, I dial that out. So the actual, the quality of the process then becomes far greater. So I also read that the article said 35% of staff can be replaced by robots.
Yeah.
Not planning on sharing that with my boss.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think the point is there's a great opportunity here to streamline operations, provide a great customer experience. So I think RPA
It does
is a
bring up a
strong
bizarre
place.
image of a little robot sat at a thing in Croydon, typing in.
Well, I was a little disappointed when I realised it wasn't that.
Yeah, I thought I'm seriously. I'm still thinking that. That's the only thing I can take away from this today. Legacy systems, Joe, clearly always an issue. There are ways to work through this, but it is about people a lot of the time to work with legacy systems. How do you innovate with legacy systems? Can you be flexible? Can you be agile? Can you take that new approach to customer interaction?
And that's the hard thing to kind of triangulate, I guess. It's the moving as quickly as you can to keep up with customer trends and customer experience on the kind of front-facing side, and then trying to get the systems at the back to work. And I think that's a little bit where big banks and big organisations kind of get their knickers in a twist, if you like, because what do? You don't want to trade off waiting 3 years until you can deliver something for a customer because you're trying to fix your legacy systems. In the meantime, you've created potentially a worse and worsening problem, or you have to make a parallel activity. And I think that's probably the best way to go, but it's obviously expensive.
Yeah.
In parallel to do something where you're trying to unpick some of the great gains you've made on the customer experience side. So it's kind of a balancing act, really, focusing on the right things. I think you can't wait for the legacy systems to be completely transformed before you deliver good customer experience.
Getting your strategy right, and you have to have workarounds, but getting the ideas and the attitude and the process right, despite the fact the computer may be a bit further behind.
Yes.
Any new technologies, Jason, that you think are really enabling better customer service and experience?
Well, luckily, most of them aren't new. I mean, most of the technologies that we're employing have been around with the big retailers, the big internet companies for a decade.
Yeah.
So it's bringing them into a different industry that's really the key.
And the way you use them, I guess you're going to adapt them to your particular business. I mean, again, getting your strategy right, getting the ideas right, understanding who you want to target.
Well, I think you have to start from a position that you're not going to get it right first time.
Yeah.
So everything from the technology architecture you have to the way you approach things, to the fact that we've just launched a sort of an alpha program for customers to actually try, our initial product. Yeah. It's a case of in a market that's going to be it's going to be disrupted by challenger banks coming along, by PSD2, by a variety of sort of changes in terms of smartphone penetration in the marketplace. No one really knows where this is going. Everyone just knows that you have to be good at being fast at delivering great value for customers. And how quickly can you iterate depends not only on legacy systems but also on how you structure the company and a variety of other things. Yeah. So there's it's going to be it's a bloodbath. There's a war. Like there's a lot of players going for a large group of customers. Yeah. And it's great.
A lot on the boardroom table. There we go. Darren, there is, I guess, a two-speed IT world that this is living in. Do you think that banking industries, you work with a lot of financial institutions, do you think that there is progress, that the industry is actually working ahead and starting to make headway?
To some degree, yes, is the short answer. I think two-speed IT, maybe not everybody's familiar with that term, but essentially two approaches to IT. Yeah. Approach one, to Joe's point, the traditional approach, running stable, mission-critical systems, making sure they're always available. Very important point when we think about customer trust. Yeah. I want to know when I walk up to that ATM, I can get to my money. I know when I want to apply for a product, the service is there. The second approach, though, is more around that kind of agile, innovative, being able to adapt and adopt new offerings quickly as possible. And I think, what I'm seeing now within the customer base is that parallel activity, certainly within the established players, if I can use that term.
Yeah. And that is a workaround again. That is an ability to adapt to the difficult situation, maybe with the legacy systems that you're in.
It is, but I think again, outside of the established players, it still has a place, because we need to, if we're going to listen to the customer and understand their needs, we need to be able to react to that quickly. So we need an agile approach, and whether that's a new service via a mobile app or a new product line via the website, I need to be able to offer that quickly. And let's be honest, some of the products may be unsuccessful. So I want to limit the amount of IT overhead to get that implemented. I don't want to wait 3 years and then find the market's moved on and no one needs that product.
And that's the modern
anymore.
approach, Chris. I mean, that's the test and learn thing going on, isn't it?
It is, and the advantage that one has establishing a bank now, of course, is that you can build these, in theory, ultimately scalable, future-proof systems where you can, at very little cost, add in new products, take them out if they don't work, adapt them a little bit as is required. That's the key. That's the key benefit in the end.
And Joe, does that make sense to you? That must be your daily life in some ways. You know, trying to test and try to learn from customers, but also being agile.
Yeah, what you can't do when you've got 11 million digital customers is fail fast with security.
No.
So, you know, there are things where it's appropriate to do it, and there are things where you have to be incredibly careful. And in terms of customer experience, that's the ultimate one, that people want to make sure their money's safe. So, yes, it is
To a
a
point.
balance.
Yeah.
Can I just make a point there, if you don't
Please
mind? The trust was mentioned, and that, to me, we talked about obstacles.
Yeah.
To me, rebuilding trust is the biggest obstacle that's out there, because that's what's going to stop people from taking on and trying new products and switching.
Yeah.
It's all about rebuilding that trust. That's why we've taken this banking oath approach, because we want to get people really believing in the way that we're doing things and the way banks should be doing things to rebuild that trust. Because that, to me, is the biggest obstacle for the growth of the business.
We really should have another hour from this point to talk about consumer trust, because it is fundamental. But we have to move on. We have to move on, Jason. Just for a second, I'll come back to you in a second. So far, we've looked at the most important trends and questions facing banks. Let's now just talk about future disruptors a little bit. And Jason, you know, there are many disruptors in the market, but the data, the insight that data handled correctly brings, how can you move past the disruptions in the market, by doing that properly, by getting the data right, by focusing on the customer and getting those insights right within the parameters your business needs in terms of what it's trying to achieve?
Sure, it's not the volume of data that you collect.
Yeah.
You know, it has to start with an intent to obsess about your customers and find the things that they don't even know that they really need. You know, customers are not great at designing products. Customers are not, actually great at innovating things, but they are expert on their lives and what that's about. So in the end, it starts with people. You know, all of the most amazing data science you've ever seen has started with a data analyst somewhere who has had a hypothesis that he has the data or she has the data in order to be able to test. So it's great to be able to collect and to use, and then to have someone look at and to understand how this can be best put to use. With this toolbox of 200 pieces of data that you have from every transaction and GPS, everything else, how can I make that guy's life better? Yeah. And then with that, and be able to plug that data into a microservice, into some kind of service that then delivers it in an automated way, it is the goal.
Practically, I mean, you know, how do you break through this? Any other challenger or establish a systemically important bank? Well, you know, what can you do to reposition? I mean, essentially what you're doing is putting the customer at the heart of what you do. How do you reposition? How important is transparency, Chris, as part of that?
It's critical because in the end, the customer has to be at the centre of this. It's all about being customer-centric. They want to see much more about the processes which you're going through to do their business, so they understand what's going on, which again is all part of building trust again. So the transparency is crucial in building trust in both directions. And so you have to build into the way you use analytics the ability to make sure that it is all transparent and the customer understands where the idea that you've created has come from through the use of analytics.
Joe, would you put, you know, trust and transparency as? Do you think that's what we customers most want? What do you think it is that we most want? I mean, every day it'll change depending on the last 10,000 people that you've seen the records of, or the complaints of, or whatever it might be. What do we need?
I think the customers want it when they want it, and they don't when they don't. So there is an absolute level of expectation that I've banked with you for 25 years. You should know that I have no money left at this time of year, or that I always go overdrawn then, or I might need to pick up the phone for something. So that there is an absolute expectation that we have this kind of single view of all of their interactions with us, and that we can preempt what they want to do. But they don't want us to use that in certain ways, and they do want us to use that in other ways. So great if we can use that to create excellent customer service, less good if we're using that to, as they might see it, push products their way, or whatever that might be. So there is an understanding that we have access to and use all of this data. It's just different levels of expectation on how that might be used, or a realisation on how that's being used. So in a branch, nobody thinks twice about the fact that somebody sitting opposite them can see everything they've done. They know their account number, they're in their account effectively. But when you are online, there's an absolute expectation that we don't know any of that information. So it's sort of changing that with that level of trust and that level of transparency.
And again,
it's changing with channel shift.
That is the limit of our trust, isn't it? When we don't have control anymore,
Yeah.
With more choice and with more power, it comes more. We want more control.
Yeah.
It's only understandable.
Yeah.
We're all the customers,
Yeah.
so we know what that's like. But Darren, how can we achieve, in terms of the solutions and the way that banks are going to work, that single view is really, really important, but also that timely communication, that timely interaction.
Yeah, I think for me it's about connected services. If you look at how the product set that the banks typically offer now, it's very broad. Now, as a customer, frankly, I don't care that there are different divisions within that organisation, different lines of business systems. I expect a connected service, meaning when I've been banking with this bank for many years, when I move to them for a mortgage, if the first touch point is I have to fill out an application form with all of my details, you're not understanding me as a customer. You're treating me as a transaction. So, providing that connected environment, single customer view, 360 degree, whatever label you want to put on it, from a customer perspective is critical. And whether you have legacy systems or not, I think there's a great opportunity right now to join it together, provide that better customer experience, and then I'm far more likely to take on additional products as a result.
And that'll see us well going into the future, won't it?
Yes, one customer view in the end is the bedrock for this, because that reaffirms the fact that the customer is at the centre of everything you do, and how you build your relationship off that one customer view is critical.
And how important do you think technology and data and analytics and so on are going to be as part of this? Clearly, it's the only way forward. That's a stupid question. But that fine, nuanced balance between personalisation and personal touch.
There are a number of tensions, and it's less of a balance and more trying to resolve them to get the best, to have your cake and eat it.
Yeah.
On one hand, you want something that's human, you want something that feels like it's looking after you. On the other hand, you want something that's technology driven, or a good proportion of the market does. On one hand, you're looking for the simplest, one button, and we can have an Uber outside now, pow, away we go. You want simple, but you want power. You want things, mountains to move behind the scenes in order to change when you've just selected, one button. And equally, you want something that's innovative and brings the best, but something that's rock solid and delivers all of those things.
Yeah.
And actually, the best businesses and I do think that there will be that Mondo is well positioned to help sort of transcend, to help bring those tensions sort of together, because it doesn't have to be a balance. It doesn't have to be impersonal technology versus someone who's there with you.
Yeah.
And I think all of those tensions can be balanced.
Darren?
Yeah, just to share a quick story. I was working with a bank last week, actually in Istanbul. They've made a significant investment in terms of their online banking facilities, but they weren't actually seeing the adoption rate of that they're expecting. So they came up with quite an interesting marketing initiative. they actually identified the percentage of the customer base that hadn't signed up for online banking. They sent a communication to those individuals. When I clicked on it, it was a video link to a type of CNN broadcast personalised to me that said, Darren Collins, the last individual in the world that doesn't do online banking. So that grabbed my attention. Bit of humour, you wouldn't normally expect that from a bank. The spooky thing was, because I've clicked on the link, they know. My phone rings, and it's allegedly the CNN reporter saying, so Darren, you have a busy life. Why haven't you registered for online banking? Now, would that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Maybe not. But in their case, they moved about another 20% of their customer base to online. So reducing their operating cost, improving the profitability for the bank, but ultimately providing a better customer experience as a result. So I found that quite an interesting, bit of an innovative and different approach.
I hope the final part of that story wasn't you walked outside and there were a lot of zombie bankers at the apocalypse. That happens
Thankfully not.
That happens every other week to me. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Obviously, we want to keep on making this practical as we can, despite the broad areas. Now it's time to hear from you. We have had some questions coming in. You still have the chance to write to us, either using the question section, we'll whip through them, or you can use Customer15 on Twitter. So you've been sharing your comments and experiences with us. Let's spend the last 10 minutes or so doing that. First, let's go to Natalie Malewski. Now, Natalie, you've written to us a couple of times. We might have a chance to get through unless the flood of questions comes through. You're Head of Insights Comm Services at Telefonica. Why do you think banks missed digital payments? And what role do you think they can play now that Apple Pay and wallets are spreading? Why do you think banks missed digital payments? Do you think banks have missed digital payments? Well, let's look at the impact of the Apple Pays and the wallets and the so on and so forth. That's the big issue here. That's the big emerging front of the battle. What do you think? Darren.
So I'm an Apple Pay user, but the point for me is it's still my bank underneath it. So Apple Pay is great in terms of streamlining that experience, but Apple Pay still requires the banking infrastructure underneath to process the payment. So, one could say that the ownership of the customer experience has shifted away a little bit from the bank, but the bank still has the responsibility to process that transaction. So I think we could get a bit too caught up in terms of Apple Pay is changing the world. I think it's a layer on top of an existing process. But just my view, I'd be interested.
I'll put you on the spot there, Joe. No,
and because I've got a similar point of view actually, and whether we missed the boat or not, I'm not sure, because underlying everything is our own payments.
Yeah.
And if you look at something like PayPal, you're still funding another account. So actually, in theory, you're making it more complicated in terms of the chain. But actually, where we missed the boat was in the customer experience, which is people are shopping online. They want to easily be able to pay for things that doesn't take, taking your card out of your purse and going through all various screens. So it was a point of ease that I think has been caught up.
But it's a target, isn't it? You'll hear about it's the name, it's the brand, it's the aggregator kind of interaction. Jason.
Well, I agree. Whether it's Apple Pay, Google Wallet, Android Pay, Samsung Pay, in some way or other, they're pretending to be chips. They're pretending to be cards. So it's almost like a different channel. So while you might have channels of communication in terms of web chat and phone and letters and whatever, there are different channels of payment. And the card everyone uses and contactless has been a massive success. But equally, we don't really have Venmo. I guess Ping It is half kind of aiming at that. And we have had the device manufacturers and people kind of come and say, well, this is how you can do that digitally with that one device. So I think there's still a lot to play for, and it's a really interesting area. But again, it's one of those pieces that has been sort of chopped off of the kind of banking kind of journey.
Chris, do you think there's a place for the SMEs and larger to be almost that front end? And there has to be a willingness in the market to work with these people, obviously.
It's all about ease and speed of being able to settle transactions in the end. I mean, if a credit card could be a phone, then you wouldn't need Apple Pay because it can't. You do it the other way around. But so for SMEs, it's just, for example, it's all about the speed of being able to transact. And if you can do that electronically and digitally through a link straight to your bank, then fine.
Quick question from Twitter. How valuable do you think public information on the internet is to enhancing customer service? And does anyone of you, that's you, have any ideas on how to improve this? So look, the internet clearly, I mean, look, it's unsubstantiated sometimes, but it is out there, so customers will see it. This is an age-old question about social media, the internet, public voices talking about you.
I mean, I think if I can,
please do.
All of our marketing is going to be through social media,
right?
And the personal interaction with the relationship banker, the local banker.
Yeah.
So it's extremely important to us going forward in terms of Facebook, in terms of Twitter, in terms of whatever has come along in 5 years' time in terms of the social media approach to these things. So everything that is out there publicly about you, therefore, is absolutely critical. Yeah. And how you manage that is and use it, to be fair, is absolutely key.
I think there's probably two points. Firstly, the banking has traditionally been very isolated. It's been that vault in your life that's separate from everything else. Yeah. And that's especially with the European legislation and PSD2 and APIs coming through, then that's going to change radically. Yeah. I think secondly, there's it's interesting from a customer perspective. Yeah. Like, what can that external information give you in order to make it happen? Yeah. And that's definitely something that we've been experimenting with, playing with to see how that works.
Yeah. A question from William Wright, who's from Brand Intellect. A great question. I think that's referring either to something he heard at the time or this question here. So wait for it. Great question. What are they doing about blockchain? What's happening with blockchain now? I go for the giggle first, Chris.
No, I think it is very important, and it will transform the way that the banking systems function over time. I mean, the giggle is only in the context of people immediately think of bitcoins and all that, but there's far more than that. Yeah. I mean, blockchain to me is going to transform the way that the back offices effectively function and how settlement works. It's absolutely critical. It's and this I think is where again we some interesting discussions internally about this, about how we position ourselves for it going forward, and we're having to think 2 generations down, and blockchain I think is the way it will go.
A question just come through from Lynn Cox. Thank you, Lynn. You're Senior Programme Manager at Bridgeforce. Live events are often talked about as being key opportunities to create customer advocates. But I see little change in these areas to really wow customers. New house, death in the family, marriage, children, birth. What's your take on this? What are the key opportunities, very briefly, the key junction points to get somebody on board and for us to love you?
I think, so it's right about customer advocacy, which is back to the social point, I guess, and it's something that I know banks have been looking at for years and years. There's definitely an understanding that it's a really important thing, but I think a lot of it is in the communication and the brand permission. So where do you go when people are having these life events, and what is your brand permission to play in that space? Do we become marriage advisors, like a confetti.com? Do you become a kind of Mumsnet? Do you become, the space you're competing in is quite interesting, and how far you can push your brand in those spaces, I think, is
the lifestyle is all. It'll be interesting. Briefly, Darren, very briefly, what next? What do banks need to look at now to get that customer experience right in the next few months?
Well, I think in the short term, I'll repeat the point. It's about brilliant basics. And it's interesting because we see a lot of talk in the market about fintechs and fintech partnerships, and some really interesting stuff going on there. Yeah. But what we need to do is see technology as an enabler for that customer experience, not get caught up in the technology itself.
Brilliant. Well, I do hope you've enjoyed the last hour, and that our panel's insights and advice have helped you to understand what they see as the customer experience challenges facing banks right now. Thanks for getting in touch with your thoughts and comments. Sorry we couldn't get through to them all, but thanks for writing in. Please do give us your feedback, actually, on today's webinar by filling in the form on the right-hand side of your screen. We do value your opinion. We really want to hear from you, so let us know what you thought of today's discussion. But as we've heard over the last hour, growing expectations and new technologies are pushing banks to transform their customer experience strategies, and it's not simple. But with smart investment and better insight, banks can, and we've heard how, deliver services that customers really do value. So we hope you'll be able to join us at one of Market Force's upcoming events that will look at some of these challenges and the opportunities in more detail. Our flagship Future of Retail Banking conference is coming up on the 1st and the 2nd of December. Get your tickets now. And Jason and Chris will be joining us in London on the 9th of March for the 2020 Customer Experience Summit Financial Services. You can find out more on www.marketforce.eu.com. For now, many thanks to our great panel for taking part today and to Lexmark for supporting the webinar. Couldn't do it without them. And of course, thanks to you for watching and sending in your comments and your questions. Until the next time we meet up, all the best. Bye-bye. And that was interesting. Thank you. You can say anything you want to. I hope you have any lip readers here between Blue Peter. That's great. Look, you know, we actually were very happy.